Hello, this is the first video on this channel. Well, the first video where I'm just like sitting down and talking to the camera. Though obviously this is something I'm going to be planning to do a lot more often on this channel. Next year, I am going to college to study religious studies more seriously in an institution. However, for the past 2 years-ish, I've been very interested in studying religion. Um, but that means it's necessary to say I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a guy with an interest. Um, I'm mostly interested in witchcraft and occult history and early Christianity. Though I'm interested in everything, every single religion. People always ask me like, "Oh, what are you going to study though?" I say I'm studying religious studies, and they're like, "Oh, but what are you going to study?" Religions. But I thought for my first video, I thought I would do something more casual. Um, on this channel, I plan to dive into a lot of different interesting texts and trying to present all this information that I am very passionate about in a way that's like accessible and fun and you could just put on and listen to or watch. Um, so I'm going to talk about two books that are about as different as books can be while being about the same subject. And they're about one of my favorite subjects. I have two books about Mary Magdalene. This one is The Meaning of Mary Magdalene by Cynthia Bourgeault. I think it's Bourgeault. I don't know. And then I have Mary Magdalene, Christianity's Hidden Goddess by Lynn Picknett. Um, and they are, as I just said, very radically different books. Cynthia Bourgeault more or less deep dives into the legends, um, the text of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, etc., around Mary Magdalene, and eventually she makes the argument about how to integrate Mary Magdalene back into Orthodox religion, back into traditional, mainstream, organized Christianity. I found this book very well put together, very scholarly, easy to read, I thought, and very thorough in its explanation. It really dives deep into all the things that are brought up within the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. This book, Lynn Picknett here, was it's academic in the sense that it cited many sources, and Lynn Picknett is a scholar. However, she's not a biblical scholar. She did not really. This book is less academic. Let's say that. This book is not very interested in trying to make sort of the teachings of Mary Magdalene, the figure of Mary Magdalene. It's not interested in making her accessible to people. And in fact, where this book tries to reunite Mary Magdalene with Christianity, I think this tries to drive a stake between Mary Magdalene and Christianity. It tries to kind of make a spectacle out of Mary Magdalene, and it proposes a lot of different theories about her life. It does not really dive into any things attributed to her, but rather just has a lot of speculation, I felt. Um, that being said, it is fun. It's fun. I would not take most of the things said in this book very seriously. To give you a quick overview about what I mean when I say the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, there is a Gnostic Gospel that is attributed to Mary Magdalene. Of course, many of the Gospels were not actually written by the person they're named for. We're fairly sure that like Mark wasn't written by Mark, Matthew wasn't written by Matthew, same with Luke, John, all of them. They're written by scribes that were told this by so and so. So the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, it's part of the Nag Hammadi library, if you're familiar with that. And the Gnostic Gospels are very interesting because they've really gained a resurgence in scholarship since 1945, when the Nag Hammadi Library was discovered. We have been aware of different Gnostic Gospels since before then, but the Nag Hammadi Library was really the discovery that set things in motion. Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, is a non-canonical gospel. That is to say, early Christians probably considered what is now canonical gospel and what is now Gnostic gospel to be part of the same literature, the part of the same literary trend or movement. That's just a quick overview of the Gnostic Gospels. A lot of what we know about Mary Magdalene is based off of Gnostic texts like that. The first part of this book by Cynthia Bourgeault deals with Mary Magdalene's appearances within the canonical Gospels. It does not go into the Gospel of Mary Magdalene straight away. It starts doing that in the 4th chapter, in which she gives you a full text, which, as far as I'm aware, is sort of a hodgepodge translation between Karen King's translation and Leloup's translation. She lays out the entire text and then dives deep into it with her own analyses, which I found very clear and very easy to follow along with, and also very enlightening. The second part of the book is touching on Mary Magdalene as the beloved of Jesus. This actually begins, this sort of theory begins with this book, so that's an interesting connection. As far as I'm aware, Lynn Picknett was the first person to really propose such a thing, that Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ were sexually involved. And in Lynn Picknett's book here, it is very much supposed to be a spectacle. Both women suggest there is reason to believe that Christianity has intentionally kept the figure of Mary Magdalene and the mythology around Mary Magdalene under wraps and sort of hidden from the public for a long time, partly because she represents a very strong woman who was at the same level as a lot of the other early church fathers. So it's interesting that they both agree, actually, here in interpreting Mary Magdalene as the beloved of Jesus Christ. It's very interesting that Lynn Picknett tries to bring this point up as if to scandalize, as if to say this image of purity that the church has put out of there is no sexual immorality. Cynthia Bourgeault really tries to say, no, it's not like that. In fact, she proposes that she calls it the fifth way, a way of divine love and sex even that is spiritually holy. Oh, I apologize for the outfit and slight lighting change. It is the next day. As I was saying, let's just brush past that. She actually gets this idea of a fifth way path to holiness and ascendedness from a man that I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I'll put it on screen. Yes, a fifth way path is a path of all-consuming sort of love, where you love someone so much you would give up everything for them. And through that state of being able to give everything up, and through that state of kenosis, you reach a state of holiness, really. A quote I read in that book that I felt really summarized the entire point of the book in very few words was that you're not letting go of something in order to get something better. You are trying to recognize that the letting go is the something better. By the end of the book, she is outlining ways in which we can reintegrate Mary Magdalene into Christianity. Really what Cynthia Bourgeault is arguing here is that Christianity needs to get more in touch with its mystic roots, that it needs to become much more in touch with what she calls the imaginal realm, which is not to say imaginary. I cannot summarize all of the things she says about the imaginal realm here in this video because it would take forever, but it was very fascinating. A quick word about anointing rituals, which I mentioned there for a second. Um, I thought actually Lynn had a very good argument about them. Um, so the thing is, for a very long time, Mary Magdalene has been conflated with a character called Mary of Bethany in the Gospels. And Mary of Bethany is the character who poured oil on Jesus's feet and washed it off with her hair. Mary of Bethany is described as an amoral woman, or potentially insinuating that she was a prostitute. Mary Magdalene herself in the Gospels, when she is mentioned by name, is never labeled as a prostitute. If you agree that Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany are the same person, that means that you are disempowering Mary Magdalene by saying that she is only a prostitute, that she is an immoral woman or a dirty woman. And this can be interpreted as sort of slandering the name of Mary Magdalene, who may not have been a prostitute at all. However, if you say that Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany are different people, then you take away the aspect of Mary Magdalene that is associated with anointing Jesus' feet. Lynn Picknett believes that this represents a very powerful ritual and that it shows that Mary Magdalene knew that Jesus was going to die and had the same prophetic abilities as Jesus, even. So either way you say, if you say Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene are the same or different, you are in some way erasing part of her story and disempowering her. However, let's start talking a bit more about this book. Let's just review some of her points by chapter, and I think they speak for themselves. In the Magdalene alternative, she begins to argue that the Holy Grail is actually the child of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, who started a royal bloodline in France, which this is simply ripped from the Da Vinci Code. She then begins to argue in Sacred Sex and Divine Love that Mary Magdalene was a black woman from Ethiopia. She explains this by saying that there is a place called Magdala in Ethiopia, and that the name Magdalene could very well mean from Magdala. However, there is also a far more likely place that she is from, Magdal in Palestine. Also, Magdala, as far as we are aware, was not named that before the Victorian era. But she begins to argue that Jesus and Mary Magdalene engaged in Egyptian sexual rituals. She also cites the works of Leonardo da Vinci. As we see, she rips most of her information from the Da Vinci Code, a fictional novel. She uses a lot of Da Vinci's art as evidence for her theories, which I find very interesting, but not scholarly. For example, she argues that the Virgin Mary was not actually a virgin, because in one of Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, you can kind of imagine a phallic symbol in the rocks behind her. I'll put that painting on screen. And you can see how that's, in the first place, a little bit of a reach, and in the second place, only proves that Leonardo da Vinci believed that the Virgin Mary was not a virgin, and does not prove much more than that. She goes on to be in full swing by the chapter The French Connection in conflating Mary Magdalene with many other goddess traditions of the Near East, the Middle East, Europe even. And she starts with pointing out that Jesus is associated with King Solomon of the Old Testament because Jesus is called the son of David, and Solomon was the actual son of David. And that Solomon was considered a very, very wise man, and Jesus was considered a wise man. So they are similar prophets in that sense. and they point out that King Solomon was considered to have an Ethiopian lover, the Queen of Sheba, and that this is likely what the book of the Bible, Song of Songs, is about. However, she goes on to say that because King Solomon had an Ethiopian lover, that means Jesus must have had an Ethiopian lover with Mary Magdalene. She sort of points out this argument that certain things are associated with certain black goddess figures in this area at this time. So maybe in this different area at this different time, it is also associated with her. And she conflates and almost uses interchangeably different goddess figures such as Asherah, Isis, Astarte, the Queen of Sheba, the Black Madonna, and of course, Mary Magdalene. So she'll point out something that is present within the mythology of Isis, for example, and then she will just simply say, this is evidence that Mary Magdalene also was associated with this thing, or that this thing happened with Mary Magdalene as well. A notable instance of misinformation, I thought, was when she points out that medieval iconography of Mary Magdalene showed her covered with hair, and I'll put an image on that on screen as well. She goes on to theorize that perhaps they knew something about Mary Magdalene that us modern viewers did not, and then chose to show her as a sort of shamanic wild woman. However, it's notable that actually medieval iconography of Mary Magdalene showed her covered in hair because of the story of Mary of Bethany, how she washed Jesus' feet with her hair. Medieval iconography of this time was even known for this style of taking a certain idea or symbol of a character from the Bible and exaggerating that, not because that was accurately representing that character, but because it made it recognizable to the peasants who were illiterate. Pignet also suggests that the Magdalene's blackness was likely hidden because of the scandal it would cause, that Jesus would choose to have a black lover. However, this is clearly imposing our modern ideas about race onto the past, as Pignet seems to forget that they were in Palestine at the time, which was very near Egypt, and certainly there were black people there. It seems to be this sort of thinly veiled attempt to be progressive and to disagree with the Christian church and empower black women. However, she is suggesting that in ancient times that this would have been scandalous as well, which completely is a Eurocentric and very whitewashed view. There is much more I could say about this book. However, I just want to make it clear that Lynn Pignet is completely incompetent at writing books about biblical theories and early Christianity without transposing her modern ideas about what is sexy, what is scandalous, her modern ideas of race, and even misinterpreting ancient Jewish traditions, which is a real shame because this book by Lynn Pignet is far more popular than the one by Cynthia Bourgeault. While this is certainly not the case anymore, for example, the one by Cynthia Bourgeault has about 5 times the reviews on Goodreads as the one by Lynn Pignet does. What happened was that this book was published right after the Da Vinci Code movie came out. In fact, you can read on it the true life story of the legendary figure featured in the Da Vinci Code. So simply people watched the Da Vinci Code and went out and bought this book. And these more or less legends and half-baked wonderings about Mary Magdalene and claims of scandal about Mary Magdalene are what survives of her legacy in the popular consciousness today. When you start looking into Mary Magdalene, the places where information is easily accessible, is flooded with Pignet's theories with little to no citations. Frankly, I think if you're interested in Gnosticism, if you're interested in Christianity, if you're interested in honestly any kind of spirituality at all, I think it is useful and enlightening to read this book because it shows a truthful and accessible version of the figure of Mary Magdalene. If you're interested in researching Mary Magdalene in depth, I also think you should read this book, not because it is good, but because it can help you understand some common myths and misgivings that people have about Mary Magdalene. The average person isn't going to go looking for an in-depth scholarly book. They're going to look for something easy to read and exciting. They're not going to fact check themselves. They are just going to believe what seems credible. If you are interested in Mary Magdalene, but you are not going to study her in depth, do not read this book. You will end up thinking, oh, actually, she knows what she's talking about, and she does not. Thank you for joining me for this video today, a quick little book review of 2 different books. I hope to do a lot more videos like this in the future, and some that are more in-depth and research-based rather than just giving some summary and opinion. Once again, my name is Danny. I am a writer and a researcher of religion, though not at a college yet. I hope you will join me for next time. If you'd like, you could comment down below what you'd hope I'd go over. Thank you for joining me. Like, subscribe, please share with your friends and things like that. I'm not gonna beg you to because I hate when YouTubers do that, but I really appreciate it because this is my first serious video. I will see you in the next video.